Well, I'm sure that at one time or another, every one of us has been in a situation where you feel kind of out of place. But this morning, I'm thinking specifically of feeling out of place because of your faith or because of your relationship with God. I mean, it may have been a school project or a at work, or maybe in a social setting, and maybe you have to work on this project together, or you're just at an event and you just have to hang out. But you're put together with a group of people and you quickly realize they're very worldly and they're not a lot like you in that sense. They don't think like you, they don't act like you, and you feel very out of place. Well, people in those situations have responded in different ways. I mean, you might just try to blend in, maybe even compromise to fit in. You know, act like them, talk like them, so you don't stand out. Or you might be very loud about how you're different from them. And you might even be a little obnoxious or rude about it. And it may come across as judgmental. This may come from a deep desire to not compromise, but you're not really representing God's love and God's kindness in that situation as well. Or you might be respectful and compassionate and carefully discern how to interact and work with them without compromising. You might think, how can I act like Jesus among sinners? How do I show them God's love and not, at the same time, not take part in sin? Sometimes that's not an easy balance to find. And sometimes other people still may not like you. But they may respect you. And sometimes God may use you in that situation to make Him known. Today we're starting our study in Daniel, in the book of Daniel. And Daniel finds himself in a situation like that. But I'm going to say even much harder. But he finds himself out of place. He finds himself under pressure. And he's given the opportunity to make God known. Now, what if I was in his shoes? That's one of the questions we want to ask this morning. What if I was in his shoes? What would you do in his situation? How can we live to make God known? So first, let's talk about when you feel out of place. So we're going to start Daniel chapter 1 and verse 1. It begins this way. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So this is the historical setting of Daniel. So let's go back and remember a little bit what's been happening here. Josiah had been king in Judah, and he was a good king, and he carried out many religious reforms there in Judah, in Israel. But then he made a bad decision. You see, Pharaoh was coming up on his way north to fight against the Assyrians, and so he was going to pass by on his way to, fight with the Assyrians, to help the Assyrians. But Josiah saw him coming and thought, this is a good opportunity for me to go out and meet him in battle. And Josiah, to make a long story short, Josiah died that day in battle. The king died in battle. And then a little later, his son Jehoiakim, who we just read about in Daniel, his son Jehoiakim was made king by Pharaoh, because now Pharaoh had defeated them and was in control over them. And Jehoiakim was forced to pay tribute then to Egypt. So shortly after that, Nebuchadnezzar came down from Babylon to fight against the Egyptians. And while he was on that military expedition, he also besieged Jerusalem, which we just read about. And he took some things from the temple back to Babylon. It's possible even that Jehoiakim gave him those things as a tribute, or as a way of saying, here, you can have this, now leave. So they weren't being mistreated anymore. But they were now subject to Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar then took and put those things from God's temple in the temple of his god, his false gods. And you see, they thought that when you won a battle against another country, another nation, that your God beat their God. That was the way they thought. And so that's why he's putting this stuff here into the temple of his God as a way of honoring his God. And so, of course, we know that God, Yahweh, the true God, was not defeated by them or by their God. And this is made clear from what is said here in verse 2. It says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim into his hand, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, there's two significant things to see here. First of all, God is called the Lord here. Now, this may not stand out to you as anything that different, but it is. Because Lord here, you'll notice, is not in all caps. So this is not the name, this is not representing the name Yahweh, the personal name of God. It's the title Lord. Which, and this is significant because God is being called the Lord, the master, the ruler. He's pointing out that God is sovereign here. And so with this title. But secondly, it says that Jehoiakim was handed over by the Lord, by the ruler, by the sovereign one. And so who's in control here? You see, Nebuchadnezzar's victory over Judah was God's doing. God was not defeated. He's actually orchestrated this whole thing. And so the fact that God is in control is the major theme in the book of Daniel. We'll see it over and over again through the book. He sovereignly rules over all of human history, past, present, and future. So let's keep reading verse 3, chapter 1, verse 3. It says, then the king commanded Apphazaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge and understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians. The king assigned them well, let me stop there. So Nebuchadnezzar didn't only take things from the temple, he also took some people from the land of Judah. And they're described for us here. They're young men. Most likely they were teenagers. And they were from the royal family in Judah or other nobility. Secondly, they had to have a good physical appearance and not have any diseases or disabilities or anything like that. Third, they had to be intelligent and good at learning, so they were good students. And fourth, they had to have good manners and understand the proper way to behave in the king's court. So these young men, they were to be taught multiple languages, and they were to be educated in all of the best literature of the day, including some questionable things like magic and astrology, dream interpretations. In reality, they were going to be indoctrinated. They were to be taught to think like a Babylonian and to be loyal to Babylon. Now, there's a couple reasons why they would do this. Why would they take these boys from noble families and then teach them in Babylon? Well, first of all, by taking the best and the brightest of a nation's upcoming ruling class, by doing that, they weaken that nation. And so there's less of a chance that that nation will rebel against the empire. Secondly, as the empire grows, they need more and more highly qualified leaders and advisors in order to hold everything together. Without good leadership structure, the kingdom would fall apart. And so they take these boys away and indoctrinate them to make them good Babylonians. to serve Babylon. Now, the amazing thing that we'll see here is that these young men from Israel will remain faithful to God, even though they are being indoctrinated and submerged in this pagan ideology of Babylon. And even while serving Babylon, they remain faithful to God. So God's people can be faithful even while living in a sinful and even antagonistic culture. Verse 5 says, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. And so while they were there being trained, they were to be fed well. They got to eat the same food as the king. And the training lasted about 3 years. And after that, they would be tested by the king. And then, based on his evaluation of them, they would be given various assignments. Verse 6. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. And so we're introduced to these 4 young men from Israel. Now there may have been others taken from Israel, but only these 4 are named. If there were others, they probably weren't faithful to God like these 4. And we're told their names, both their birth names and their new Babylonian names. And changing their names was part of that indoctrination process, part of that assimilation process to make them Babylonians. You see, their Hebrew names, they related them to God, to Yahweh. But their Babylonian names, they related them to Babylonian false gods. And so Daniel, his name meant God is my judge. But his name was changed to Belteshazzar, which means Bel protect his life. Hananiah, his name meant Yahweh be gracious. His name was changed to Shadrach, which most likely means command of Aku, another false god. Mishael means who is what God is. His name's changed to Meshach, which most likely means who is what Aku is. You see, they're turning it around. And then Azariah, his name meant Yahweh has helped. His name was changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nego, another false god. They're trying to turn them around and change their allegiance with these new names. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. So right after telling us their new names, we see that their allegiance hasn't changed. Daniel is intent on being faithful to God. When it says that he resolved, it literally means that he set his heart to not defile himself. And so what's he do? Well, he politely requests that he not have to eat the assigned food. Now, the chief official has compassion on Daniel. He feels for Daniel, but more than that, he's afraid of upsetting the king. He's afraid of losing his own head. All right? If he disobeys the king, then he might be put to death. And so if the king finds out that he went against his order because these guys don't look as healthy or as good as the others, then he's in danger. So he says no. But that doesn't deter Daniel. I mean, he's persistent. He's determined not to defile himself. Look at verse 11. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Test your servant for 10 days, and let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And so you see, Daniel makes the same request to the steward or the caregiver who was assigned to him and to the other three. But this time he's ready with a plan. He asks for a 10-day test. So the four of them will eat only vegetables and water rather than all that choice food and the wine from the king that the other students are eating. And if after 10 days they don't look as good and healthy as everyone else, then he says to the servant, then you can do whatever you want. By the way, what is Daniel doing here? He's trusting God. See, he's saying, I'm not going to defile God, and I'm trusting that God is going to take care of me or do what he wants. So the caregiver, he decides to give it a try. And after 10 days, says they look better and fatter than everyone else. And so he continues to give them just vegetables. Now let's think about this request. Daniel didn't make a scene when he was making this request. He wasn't disrespectful. He was actually very respectful. And in all of it, he's seeking to honor God. But to honor God, Daniel chose not to do something that he thought was wrong. So, if you think about it, in this kind of situation, there are several reasons that he could have used in order to just not speak up at all, just kind of go with the flow and eat the food. I mean, one, peer pressure. You know, everyone else is doing it, so why be different? Why stand out? Or he could think this could be taken as an insult or insubordination, and I might even doing this might even put him in danger of punishment or even death. He could reason that it could make him look like he wasn't a team player. And it might hurt his chances of success or even advancement. He might think, well, God didn't help me. God didn't keep me from getting put in this position, so why be faithful? Or he could just simply say, well, it was good food. So why miss out on something good? I mean, you know, it's that if it feels good, if it's fun, then why not? Well, why not? Because he's seeking to honor God. And we can make the same kind of excuses in our lives for being unfaithful to God. But it's a lie. Don't fall for the lie. Live to honor God. Well, let's keep reading verse 17. It says, as for these four youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So at the end of the training, Daniel and his friends, they excel beyond the rest. They're more skilled. They have better understanding of what they were taught. They were wiser and more intelligent. And they are chosen to serve the king. And they're better at their jobs than any of the others. And so they are the best of the best. No matter what the subject is, they have a better understanding. They have better ideas. But why? Notice why. God gave them this skill and understanding. It's clearly stated. God gave them wisdom. He gave them this understanding. You see, their greatness didn't come from their great training. It came from God. All the wisdom and all the learning and all the literature of Babylon was no challenge for God. He knew it all and more. And these 4 young men stood out from everyone else because God made them better qualified. God gave them this great wisdom. And notice the final note that's made about Daniel here. He served in the royal court until King Cyrus. That means he lasted longer than King Nebuchadnezzar. He was in the royal court for over 60 or 65 years. You know what that means? That means that almost the entire 70 years of the exile, when Israel was out, Judah was in exile, God had his man Daniel advising the king of Babylon, of this empire. Babylon was an evil place. But Daniel was there, and Daniel stood for God. But there's still one question here that we didn't talk about, and that's this one. What is the reason that Daniel decided he couldn't eat the king's food and wine? Why would it have defiled him to eat that food? Why was it wrong? Well, we're not actually told why. There is a lot of speculation about this, but there is no definitive answer to it. There was even a book written a few years back that, based on this passage, suggested that we should all only eat vegetables, like Daniel. And that was biblical. But it completely missed the point of this passage. And by the way, later in Daniel, we're going to read that he ate meat, fine foods, and wine. And so, why? Why is it wrong? Why would he have defiled himself? Well, it's possible that Daniel didn't want to eat this food because some of it might have been unclean according to the standards of Old Testament law, the Old Testament law's food restrictions. But in the Old Testament law, there's no restriction on wine that would make it unclean. It's also possible that that his issue with the food was that it was offered to idols before it was eaten. But the vegetables would also have been offered, but would have been part of that offering as well. And Daniel was okay with eating those vegetables. There's another possible explanation that has been given. And that's when we read that they were to have, that these young men were to have a good physical appearance, we assume that that means what we in our day and our culture would think is a good physical appearance, right? Good looking, slender, muscular, beautiful. Well, there's some ancient Babylonian art that has been found that it does depict kings and warriors that way. You know, muscular, beautiful, slender. But the wise men, the advisors to kings, they have big eyes, suggesting that they are intelligent, studious, and they're bald and chubby. Maybe because they sit and study all the time? But this may have been the physical appearance that they associated as being an intelligent and wise advisor. Big eyes, bald and chubby. And if that's the case, you could understand why the officials then would hesitate to give them just vegetables. Because they would end up looking thin and weak. That's not the right look. And if you remember, it said that they looked better and what? Fatter than the others. That may have been the look they were looking for. But that still leaves the question, well, so then how would that defile Daniel to eat all that food? Well, it may simply be that eating this rich food represented the idea of trusting in the king and his food and his training rather than God to make them what they needed to be. It's not clear, it's not certain, but whatever the actual reason was, the point that we see in this passage is still the same. God is in control. And he can give them both wisdom and the physical appearance or the health that they need, and he can do it however he wants to. Nebuchadnezzar is not in control. He is not greater than God. And we also see that Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are faithful to God. They will remain faithful to God, and they will work through, and God will work through them. And they will become an illustration of God's greatness and his sovereignty, that God's in control. And we'll see that they aren't quiet about God. They aren't quiet about what they believe. And so when people see what God does in their lives and how he cares for them and how he equips them, it puts a spotlight on God. God's greatness is on display. And we'll see that throughout the book. But Daniel's faithfulness to God gives God room to work, in a sense, in the lives of people around him. And God will work through Daniel to reveal himself to people. And this started with God making them to be the perfect wise men. They had the best appearance, and they had the greatest understanding because God did it. But now comes trouble. What do we do when the pressure is on? Look, chapter 2, verse 1. It says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servant the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servant the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not tell me, do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So the king has this dream that wakes him up, and he can't go back to sleep. He's upset by it. And you see, they believed that dreams had meaning. And so it was how the gods communicated with important people like kings. And he's probably scared because the dream seemed ominous to him. Now, we haven't read yet what the dream was, but there was a giant, impressive statue that is destroyed. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar is probably thinking that this has something to do with his kingdom, or even worse, with him himself. Is something going to happen to him? Is there a traitor in his court? And so he calls all his wise men and magicians and sorcerers and astrologers all together. And these are his people who are trained to know things and to figure things out. And so he tells them that he's had a dream and he wants them to tell him what it means. And so they respond with their normal, respectful greeting and then ask him, tell us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation. But he says no. Now this is unusual. He says no. He refuses to tell them what he dreamed. And he says he's not going to change his mind. His decision is firm. But he wants them to first tell him what he dreamed and then give him the interpretation. Now, why does he want that? Well, it appears that he doesn't trust them. He wants to make sure that they will tell him the truth, especially if this is a bad message, if it has a bad meaning. He wants to know that they're going to tell him the truth. You see, these men were supposed to be able to communicate with spirits or with the gods, and they were trained in the study of dreams. And so they would use their training and they would look things up and they would give an interpretation. But how can the king really know? How can he be certain that their interpretation is right? He wants a guarantee at this point. If they were able to first tell him what he dreamed, then he could be sure of their interpretation. You see, if they were able to do the harder thing, well, then he trusts them to do the easier thing. If these men were able to do what they claim, then they should be able to do this. This is what the king's thinking. And then he adds some motivation. If you do it, oh, you're going to be rewarded. If you don't, you're going to be put to death by dismemberment. And so they respond by making the same request they made before, as if they didn't hear him. Well, tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation. But Nebuchadnezzar knows that they're just stalling. And that they can't do it, but they don't want to admit that they can't do it. And so they have no answer, so they just keep talking and hoping that the king will change his mind. But he stands firm and he doesn't trust them, and he's given them an ultimatum. Either they tell him both the dream and the interpretation, its meaning, or they die. So at this point, they protest. This is humanly impossible, they say. No man can do this, and you know what? They're right. Then they add that no king has ever made such a request. So they're saying that there's no way that anyone can do what the king is demanding, and they're saying that he is unreasonable, that he is unreasonable to demand this. They're accusing him of being unfair, of being an unjust king. That's a big accusation. Then they finally admit their own shortcoming. They were supposed to be able to get answers, and they all assume that the dreams come from God, the gods, and so only the gods could give the answer. But what do they say? They say the gods don't live with flesh. They don't live with humans. They don't associate with humans that way. And so they're saying that they have no way of communicating with their gods. They can't get an answer. They just can't do it. Look at verse 12. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And so the king is furious, and he sentences all the wise men to death. But now we find out that for some reason, Daniel and the other three from Judah weren't there at that meeting. They don't know what's been happening here. And so while the guard or the executioner is gathering up the wise men, he goes to get Daniel and the other three. So Daniel carefully talks to the guard, and he asks him, why is the king doing this? And once he hears what's happened, Daniel goes in to talk to the king. And he's bold and apparently very wise and tactful, because Nebuchadnezzar listens to him. This is interesting because he had just accused the wise men of stalling, and he condemned them to death. But now he grants Daniel a little time. This is actually amazing. I mean, but notice that Daniel suggests that he will get an answer. And so maybe it was Daniel's confidence that made him say, okay, I'll give you some time. And where does Daniel's confidence come from? It comes from God, from knowing God. And so the four of them, they start praying. And they ask God for help. They ask him for an answer. They know where the answer will come from. It'll come from the one true God, the God of heaven. But notice that what they're asking God for. They ask him for mercy. See, they want God to show them compassion so that their lives and the lives of all the other wise men will be spared, saved. Let's keep reading, verse 19. It says, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He rules kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. So while they're praying, God gives Daniel a vision, and he tells them what they need to know. And Daniel's immediate response wasn't to run out of the room and go run to the king. His immediate response was to praise God. He praises God because he knows that no one else had the answers. He praises God for his power and because God changes things in the world. In other words, he praises God because God is in control. And he praises God for giving people wisdom and might. And so basically, he's saying God is in control, and there's nothing he doesn't know or understand, and there's nothing beyond his power. And then notice the focus of it all. It's all on God. Until you get to the very end of the prayer. Then at the end, he thanks God and praises him specifically for helping him in this situation. So, what do you do when you find yourself in the pressure cooker? We would do well to follow Daniel's example. Pray. Go to God. Look to God for help. Ask him for mercy. Keep your focus on God. And then when God shows you mercy and grace, thank him for it. But the situation doesn't end here. And we see that you can make God known even when God gives you opportunities. Look at verse 24. It says, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known the king's interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, No wise men, enchanter, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. And so Daniel tells the guard not to execute the wise men, because he has an answer for the king. Don't miss this. The first thing he does is protect the others. He's concerned for people's well-being. So he says, don't hurt them. But then the guard goes in and tells the king that he's found someone to interpret the dream. And it's actually a little funny because it appears that he takes credit. I found this guy. Or maybe he's just really excited because now he won't have to execute all of the wise men. But he confidently tells the king that Daniel will give an interpretation. But what is the king demanding? Not just an interpretation. First, he wants the person to tell him his dream and then interpret it. And so he asks Daniel this question, are you able to tell me the dream and the interpretation? Sounds like the king is skeptical. And in the beginning of Daniel's answer, it may have confirmed his skepticism, because he starts off by saying, no, I can't. He says, I can't tell you your dream. In fact, no man can tell you your dream. No matter what training they've had, or what pagan practices he uses, he says the same thing as the other wise men. No one can do this. But he stops there. He doesn't stop there. He says, but there is a God who can do this. There is a God in heaven who can. And God, the true God, God in heaven, is set in contrast to the gods of Babylon. This God reveals things. He knows all, and he has shown it to me. Well, then Daniel doesn't only explain the dream, but he tells Nebuchadnezzar why he had the dream. God is revealing to Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future, specifically in the end times. And Daniel also knows that the king has been lying in bed thinking about the future before he had this dream. And God, who knows the future, then revealed part of the future to the king. And at this point, Daniel finally mentions himself, but it's only to say that he doesn't know the answer because there's something special about him. He says, that's not me. Daniel says that he knows just because God chose to reveal it to the king. Daniel's just the middleman. And Daniel, we see here, is humble, and he exalts God. He puts all the attention on God. And I wonder if we would be more like Daniel, humble, or if we might be more like the guard who took credit. Well, let's keep reading verse 31. He says, you saw, O king, and behold, a great image. The image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, and its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And so here's the dream. He saw this giant metal statue that looked like a man, and it's incredibly bright as the light is gleaming off of the metal. It's such an amazing and overwhelming sight that it's scary. And so the unusual thing about the statue is that it's made of different kinds of metals. The head is gold, the arm and the chest is silver, the midsection is bronze, and then the legs are iron, but the feet have a little mix of iron and clay together. And so going from head to foot, the metals get less valuable but stronger. And except for the clay that's mixed in with the feet, that's brittle. And as this impressive statue is standing there, suddenly there's this rock. And the rock is described as cut out by no human hand. In other words, no human was involved in its making. Its origin is not human. The implication is that it is supernatural in origin. It's from God. And that stone then crashes into the feet of the statue, and the entire thing crumbles. The stone is so powerful, and the statue is completely obliterated. It turns to dust, and all that dust is blown away by the wind until there's no sign of the statue left. And then that stone grows into a huge mountain that fills the entire earth. Well, let's keep reading verse 36. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all things. And as you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. So now we get this interpretation, what the dream means. The head of gold represents Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. The other metals represent other empires that will rise up after Babylon. And in some way, each of these following kingdoms, subsequent kingdoms, will be inferior to the previous one. Maybe less moral, we're not told. But the fourth kingdom will be very strong, and it will be divided and have weak points. Well, then you have the rock. The rock represents this new kingdom, a kingdom from God that is over all the earth. And he will set up a kingdom of his own that will never fail. It will be the final kingdom, and it will last forever. Now, there is a whole lot of discussion over who these kingdoms are, who these empires are. And the first one is obviously Babylon, because Daniel says so. But beyond that, you can't be certain. And there's actually disagreement amongst scholars. Looking back in history, it's been argued that after Babylon came the Medo-Persian Empire, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and then the Romans. But some have argued other variations as well. And so who exactly is it? Well, we can't really know who he was referring to. But it also doesn't really matter. In fact, focusing on that too much obscures the main point of the passage. We could also argue that the stone represents Christ's millennial kingdom or the eternal kingdom. But we're going to focus on the main point here. The statue represents the kingdoms of the earth, the kingdoms of men. But who is in control throughout history? God. Notice that Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar he is the king of kings, that Nebuchadnezzar is the king of kings, and that he has power and glory and that he rules. But how did he achieve this? How did he get into this position? Well, the God of heaven gave it to him. Who's in control? God. And then the empires of men continue one after the other. But what happens in the end? God's kingdom conquers all. And it is established and it is over the entire earth forever. And there's no end to it. So the main point here is that God is in control and his rule is forever. A few more verses. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. And so the king's response here seems a little over the top. It looks like he's worshiping Daniel, which would not be good. And of course, Daniel wouldn't accept worship, and he wouldn't like this. But we know this because throughout the entire passage, what has Daniel done? He's given all the credit to God, and he's taken none for himself. But Nebuchadnezzar is acting this way because he sees Daniel as the representative of the God of heaven. And so the praise is actually aimed at God coming through Daniel as his representative. But he also honors Daniel as God's representative. But then he directly honors God. And he calls him the God of gods and the Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries. In other words, he recognizes that the God of heaven, that God is the greatest of any of the gods. And that he is the sovereign control over, he has sovereign control over everything. And God also knows everything. He's able to reveal things. But when Nebuchadnezzar says this about God, this doesn't mean that Nebuchadnezzar is now converted and now worships God alone, the one true God alone. And more likely, he just added him, the one true God, into his list of gods that he worshipped. He was a polytheist. And even later, we'll see him again worshiping false gods, worshiping his idols. But he does rightly see Daniel's God as greater than the other gods. And then Nebuchadnezzar promotes Daniel, and Daniel asks him to promote his three friends, which he does. And so Daniel is now in charge of the entire district of Babylon, but he stays in the king's court. And then the three others, they are stationed out amongst the people in Babylon, and together they manage the affairs of Babylon. But let me wrap this up with a couple applications. First, these young men were taken from their home and forced to live in and be part of a pagan society, a godless society. And they had to figure out how to do this and still be obedient to God, to still live for God. It's kind of like what Jesus said about his disciples and about us. When he says we are to be in the world, but not of the world. But that's not always easy. But our goal is to honor God. We need to seek God, ask Him for wisdom, and live like Jesus amongst ungodly people. And make choices that honor God. And then second application, this passage started with Daniel seeking to honor God. And it ended with Daniel, and especially God, being honored by the king. You see, Daniel's honoring of God led to others honoring God. God worked through Daniel to reveal Himself to people, to make Himself known to people. As we seek to honor God, as we live for Him, as we make Him known and give Him credit for the things that He's done in our lives rather than take it for ourselves, God may work through you. He may give you a greater opportunity to make Him known. He may open doors for conversations about Him where you can speak boldly and openly for God, like He did for Daniel. He may put you in situations where you can help someone and give God credit. In other words, when you live for God and you seek to honor Him and you put Him first, God may give you the opportunity to do great things. That may be standing before kings. That may be sharing the gospel with someone. And I would actually ask, which is greater? Which is the greater thing? But God may give you opportunity to do great things. And as a result, others may give God glory and honor. In this world where we don't belong, where we don't fit, live to honor God and make Him known.